to REIN, the Real Estate Investor Growth Network with your hostess, Jen Josie. Join like-minded real estate investors and accelerate your business towards greatness. You will hear step-by-step strategies for success, interviews with real estate rock stars, and we will dig deep into past projects where we bear it all, including the good, the bad, and some just plain ugly. So get excited. Here's the bestower of badassery herself, the real Jen Josie. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi, and welcome back. I'm Jen Josie, creator of REIN, the Real Estate Investor Growth Network. Whoop, whoop. On today's episode, we have a guest that will be sharing their badassery. But before we begin, here's today's badassery bestowment, my little badass gift to you. Today's topic is virtual staging. Virtual staging is a digital method to furnish and decorate a property for marketing purposes. Understanding its pros and cons are essential for investors. Here are the pros. Pro number one, it's cost effective. Virtual staging is typically much cheaper than physical staging. There's no need to rent furniture or pay for movers and designers. Pro number two, flexibility in design. You can easily change styles, colors, and furniture arrangements to suit different tastes or highlight various features of the property. Pro number three, quick turnaround. Virtual staging could be done quickly, often within a few days, which is much faster than traditional staging. Pro number four, enhanced online appeal. Given that most property searches begin online, virtual staging can make your listing stand out with attractive, well-furnished interiors. Pro number five, no physical maintenance. Unlike physical staging, virtual staging requires no upkeep or insurance against damage or wear and tear. Now here are the cons. Con number one, lacks tangible experience. Virtual staging doesn't provide the tactile experience of physical staging. Buyers visiting the property might be disappointed by empty rooms after seeing furnished photos online. Con number two, quality variation. The effectiveness of virtual staging depends heavily on the quality of the software and the skill of the designer. Poorly executed virtual staging can look unrealistic and deter potential buyers. Con number three, potential misrepresentation. There's a risk of misleading buyers if the virtual staging drastically alters the perception of the property's size or condition. Con number four, limited impact on certain buyers. Some buyers might find it hard to connect emotionally with digitally staged photos compared to the physical staging. And con number five, dependence on technology. Virtual staging requires buyers to have access to online listings. It might not be as effective for open houses or print advertisements. So, when considering virtual staging, it's important to balance these factors with your marketing strategy, target demographic, and specific characteristics of the property. A combined approach using virtual staging for initial online marketing and physical staging for open houses might sometimes offer the best of both worlds. Now, on to today's episode of the Real Estate Investor Growth Network podcast. We have with us Trevor Oldham. In 2017, Trevor created Podcasting U in response to the necessity for outstanding real estate investors to have the opportunity to spread their narrative on high-ranking podcasts. So far, Podcasting U has worked with 400 plus real estate professionals and booked over 6,500 interviews. You all know I believe in the power of podcasting, so it's my pleasure to introduce you to Trevor Oldham.
Thanks, Jen. Excited to be here. Excited to chat.
Yay! Is this your first podcast?
I wish I could say it was.
Do you have a podcast?
So I'm actually launching one this year. I was thinking about launching one last year, started recording episodes, and then had the birth of my daughter, so my first child. So that put a little wrench in that. That was a little more time crunch than I expected, but now got her in daycare last month. So now it's now the possibility that the time's opened up a lot more now
it's
instead of
go
watching
time.
all day.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you young man, I say young man because I'm twice your age. Holy cow, I'm twice your age. But I love that you do this. And there's such a need for, and I jokingly said this So that you're the pimp for the real estate investors out there, because what you're doing is you're getting them out there, you're getting them exposure. And in this industry, it is huge to have that. And podcasting is a great way for people to get their message out there. And I just love it. But you actually have some experience in real estate. So give us a little background on your real estate experience.
Yeah, most certainly. So it was probably about a year and a half, 2 years ago. I was working with a business coach and he said, you have a lot of these real estate clients. Why don't you invest in real estate? And I thought to myself, well, I don't know. I just never really thought about it to myself. So that sort of put me down the rabbit hole. And I thought about going down and, did I want to be active? Did I want to go out and say buy a duplex or buy an apartment complex or self-storage, mobile home park, whatever it may be? I was like, I don't know if I really want to actively, more introverted. I don't know how I'd be able to handle tenants. Would they be able to take advantage of me? That type of deal. And then that's when I started to learn more on the passive investing side. And that just seemed more opportunistic for me, where I could get involved in real estate, investing in these deals, whether they're 25, 50K or 100K minimums. And I'm not talking like these crowdsourced deals where you're investing $500. Your typical sponsored deals, you're coming in as an LP or a limited partner and you have your general partner team. And I just found that to be more attractive. So I got into my first deal back in October, I want to say 22, and really liked it. Got the monthly distributions. That was a mortgage note fund that I had invested with, and then invested in 3 other deals since then. So outside of the mortgage note fund, I'm invested in self-storage, multifamily, and a triple net lease deal. I kind of like all these different aspects of real estate. So it was kind of like shiny object syndrome. I was like, oh, triple net lease looks good. Oh, self-storage looks good. Oh, multifamily looks good. And I know sometimes they say to pick a niche and stick within it. But in the beginning right now, I just wanted to explore different asset classes, see how the different returns come out. But yeah, it's been good. Looking forward to making my next investment. I'm going to make actually another investment with that mortgage note company probably at the end of this month, just to get more cash flow. It's a pure cash flow play. There's not a ton of appreciation coming in with that, where I'm in a self-storage deal where no distributions 2 years, where it's a pure equity appreciation play, where, heavy value add, developing new storage units on the facility. So I like to have a mixture of both, of the cash flow coming in and then of that long-term appreciation. Again, relatively young, so I feel like I can take on more of that risk. But again, it's sometimes hard to stomach investing in a deal and waiting 2 years to get any distributions. But so I like to have a mixture of both right now. And yeah, I've really enjoyed it. So far, haven't come across any bad sponsors. So that's been a good part. None of the money's been blown, luckily, so far.
Well, excellent. I actually feel like having a variety in your portfolio is actually really important, especially these days. I mean, we just had a pandemic and, short-term rentals were shut down for a couple months in some areas. And, people who were only in that niche lost thousands and thousands of dollars. So I love that you have it spread out over, and I think that's actually very, very smart, young man. We're going to keep bringing that up. What I want to get into is what you do is you match real estate investors with podcast hosts, and you reach out, you do like the introductions and things like that, do the bookings, etc. And so what are some good tips for the listeners? Because we have a lot of introverts, I'm sure, out there listening, but how do you become a good guest on a podcast?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I would say I was super introverted when it first came to podcast guesting. I'd listened to podcasts, never been a guest on a podcast. And honestly, I just took a lot of time and a lot of practice to become comfortable going on a podcast. And for those listeners out there who have never been on a podcast, they say, they're going to think to themselves, what am I going to say on the podcast? How's the podcast going to go? What stories am I going to tell? What equipment do I even need? Do I need a podcast mic? Can I just go, put in some AirPods? Could I just do it on my phone? What do I need in that sense? And I find that you just got to go out there and start. And what I mean by that, and sort of like a method that we even use for our clients that are super introverted, but maybe they're very successful in their business and they just want to go out there and get more brand awareness or bring in more investors, whatever that may be. So typically we want to get them started on like the smaller shows. So these would be shows that say have either relatively new, maybe 10 to 15 episodes. I mean, we're talking, they've only been around for 2, 3, 4 months at a time. And typically those shows are going to be easier for you to guest on versus a show that's going to have 150, 200 episodes, been around for a couple of years. So you want to start on those smaller shows. It's typically easier to pitch yourself to get onto those shows, which is nice. And then at the end of the day, those audiences probably aren't going to be too big. So if you slip up, if you make a fool of yourself, it's not going to be the end of the world where, you don't want to go out there and let's say hypothetically you had an awesome pitch, you're super successful, you go and get on a really good podcast. I don't know, let's say hypothetically speaking, like a Joe Rogan podcast.
Right.
And
that's
then you just
the
blow
podcast.
Yeah. And you just blow your opportunity out there because you're not ready for it. So you got to just build it up over time. And I find it takes about 5 to 10 interviews for you to go out there and really get comfortable with what you're doing. And I found that one of the biggest things for me as a podcast guest was, one, going out there and doing interviews, but also pushing myself beyond that, whether it's joining like a Toastmasters club, whether it's doing public speaking. So when I was doing the podcast guesting on my own, I was still in college, going out there and doing these interviews, trying to get comfortable. And they offered a public speaking course at my college. So I signed up for that for a semester, and that helped me immensely. We would go up there and it wouldn't be reading off script. You wouldn't have any, you wouldn't be standing up there with like a notebook to read directly off of or a PowerPoint to read directly off of. You'd have to prepare a 10, 15, 20-minute speech to go up there and talk. And I found that was super beneficial for me. And then again, like you have like your Toastmasters clubs for those that are more introverted, and just forcing yourself to go out there and do it. And again, it's super uncomfortable in the beginning, especially for those that are introverted. For those that are extroverted, it's probably relatively easy. You're already happy to talk to everyone and drum up these conversations. But yeah, that's really how I did it. And then just being consistent with it too. I can't do an interview today and then do an interview tomorrow, or I shouldn't say that. That'd be great. Do an interview today, do an interview 2 months from now, do an interview 6 months after that, because it's going to be hard for you to get comfortable and build consistency. So if you could do anywhere from, I don't know, 3 to 5 interviews a month where you're just being consistent, maybe an interview a week and an interview every other week, depending on your schedule, then you start to get into the flow of it. You start to get your story down. And then all of a sudden it starts to become easy. And then you actually look forward to doing the podcast interviews instead of like having stage fright and wanting to cancel the interview before you hop on. So that's sort of the process that I recommend. And then, of course, as you get more comfortable, then you want to reach out to those bigger and larger shows where, hopefully you won't make a fool of yourself. But that's sort of the strategy that I recommend to everyone. Because a lot of these real estate investors, they are super smart at what they do, but they are very introverted. You're more analytical folks. They're always looking at numbers. So it's like, how can we get them from behind the computer screen per se to go on like a podcast interview? And that's sort of, again, what I recommend. Just again, it's just going to be uncomfortable in the beginning, but you just got to force yourself to go out there and do it.
So I want to get back to the equipment here in a second, because I love that you even brought that up. But what are the benefits of a real estate investor getting on podcasts? What is the benefit for them?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different benefits. So one, generate more brand awareness for yourself. So Jen, I get to use your audience to, promote my company myself. At the end of the day, that's like the number one benefit of going out there, is getting that more brand awareness. Two, I can take this clip. Let's say we talk for 30 minutes, 45 an hour, however long it may be. I can take, hopefully most hosts will give me the video access to the full recording, and I can take it and create social media content. So now I have the social media content from it. You get the SEO bonus for it. Most hosts are going to be linking to your website. And not to be too technical, but it's very good for your website. The more people link to your website, the higher it could rank in Google, which is always nice. And then I find like the number one thing that our clients sign up for is either generating new leads for their business. Let's say if they have a real estate coaching business, if they're a CPA, if they're an attorney, cost segregation specialist, 1031, deferred sales trust, you name it. Or we have our capital raisers where they're looking to build out new leads and they're targeting your typical high net worth investors. And with your high net worth investors, you're thinking your doctors, your lawyers, your dentists, sales professionals, and just generating leads that way. So there's any number of ways that having a podcast can really help you out. And then also just the networking aspect of it. We're sitting here today, and again, say our conversation is 45 minutes. That's 45 minutes of just me and you going back and forth and talking. And, we really get to dive deep into each other and into the lives and our background. And it's just really using that networking aspect of it. And who knows, where that networking aspect of it can go. So there's just any number of benefits that you get from going out there and being a guest on a podcast.
Well, I want to kind of reinforce one that you said, because it really positions you as an expert. And so when you're looking to raise capital, which is huge for many of my listeners, you can say, oh, I was featured on this podcast. I discussed this project. I, shared this, whatever it was. But it just, like I said, it positions you as an expert, and it makes them feel like there's more legitimacy in lending to this person, et cetera. So I love that. Now I want to get back to the equipment. So what do you recommend to your newer podcast guests, what equipment they should have?
Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely got to get a good quality podcast microphone. You, again, do not want to be doing a podcast interview with just AirPods in, no podcast microphone. I recommend, and what I use for myself is just the Blue Yeti mic. You can go on Amazon, you can buy it. It's about $100. More budget conscious, you can buy the Blue Snowball. Yep, you have one right there. You can buy like the Blue Snowball. That one's $50, I think. I've used Audio Technica. That one's not too bad. Yeah,
you're naming all my equipment right now.
Hopefully you have that one right there, so you can go out and purchase that. That one might run you, 125, 150, depending. So it's definitely budget conscious. On the smaller end, probably $50. On the higher end, 150. And I mean, you could probably go beyond that, but that's typically where I recommend. And I'm in the middle ground, having that $100 mic. Outside of that, recommend like a good quality webcam. That's what I have right now. I think I bought it on Amazon, again, $30. And then I have a ring light where today, sometimes I don't need to use it when it's sunny out, but today it's pretty dreary out. It's rainy. It's, we're recording this earlier in the morning. The sun, I don't know, really hasn't come out. I don't think it's going to come out today. So it's just nice to have the ring light to add on. And again, that was like $30 on Amazon. So I mean, all in, you're looking at like 160. And then if you want, like, you can use like a podcast arm. I know, Jen, you're using the podcast arm, and again, that's typically not too much to buy. I don't use one just because I have a standing desk, so I just stand and do all my interviews. I find that just works better for me than sitting down. But again, just getting that equipment, and then at the end of the day too, having like a good backdrop. I noticed, Jen, you have a great backdrop. It's been killing me because I used to have a really nice backdrop, and then my daughter moved into my office, and then now the walls are painted white and pink, and has a crib, so I'm not working there. So I'm working out of the guest bedroom, and there's like no good, like, efficient way to set up a nice backdrop. So right now I just blur out my background because it would just be the guest bedroom that you would see, but having a nice background too, and trying to really think about it as well. But again, that's not necessarily needed, but again, nice to have, but definitely want to have a good quality podcast microphone before you go out there. And then too, if you want headphones too, that might make a difference as well.
Very good. And thanks for saying all that. And I also just want to say, as far as backgrounds, these are only released on audio, because a true podcast goes through an RSS feed and it is literally just audio. But many podcasters do use the video, like you said, for promotional purposes. The guests will ask me to get copies of the video, the Zoom video that we're doing this on, and then they promote it, and I'm all for it, just as long as I'm wearing makeup on my my side, which is not often, by the way, the joys of just audio recording. So I love that you brought all that up. Now, how does one prepare themselves for a podcast? Because I'm very structured in that I do, a couple different formats. One of my formats is for past projects, and it's a great one for newer investors where it's every question is, out there. They can prepare, have their answers ready. And we go through a past project, we break down the numbers, all that fun stuff, which, like you said, real estate people love the numbers. So, and then the flip side is I do a badass podcast for someone who's promoting something like, for you, talking about podcasting you. Am I saying this wrong?
Perfect.
Podcast you.
Podcasting you.
Podcasting you. I thought so. For people like you who are promoting Podcasting You, which, by the way, is Podcasting YOU. I don't want you to think it's university. So I'm just adding that on there because this is audio. So it makes me so nervous when I have a guest who's like, oh, we'll just wing it. I don't need to fill out all that stuff. Me as the host, I need more structure because this is my livelihood. I want to make this a win for you. I don't just, wing it on these things. So that was very long-winded, but how do you prepare your clients to be great guests?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And I would say one, that form that you'd sent over and I had filled out, definitely super helpful. Helped me give me a great overview of how the podcast interview was going to go. But then let's say on the flip side, we have a host and you're going out on a podcast and they don't have that. And they say, I just like it to be, usually they'll say, I want it to be conversational. I don't have any pre-set questions. And then you're like, well, how do I prepare for this interview? And I find that some of our clients, they're perfectly fine with that. Some of them want to have that structure. They want to know exactly what's going to be asked of them. So I find in those scenarios, one, you just got to listen to a couple episodes of the podcast, whether that's you're listening it to on, 2-speed, 3-speed, or whether you just sit there in the gym and you listen to an episode, before you're driving in the car, just listening to like a full episode. That way you can get an understanding of how the podcast is going to go. I find that super helpful. One, or outside of that, preparing and getting your stuff ready. For me, because I'm working at my desk and I'm also recording interviews, so I'm obviously not going to have my mic, my ring light up all day throughout I'm working outside of doing the podcast interviews. So I like to take about 10 minutes before the interview, make sure everything's set up, do a sound check on my end, make sure everything's working. That way I'm not scrambling like 2 or 3 minutes before the podcast interview to make sure that everything is working. Outside of that, take like a good glass of water, because sometimes you might be talking for 30 or 60 minutes. So I always make sure, I have my bottle of water always right next to me, because I don't, the last thing I want to do, looks like you have it too. The last thing I want to do is be on the interview and not have the water, especially sometimes you might become choked up when you're talking, it's just natural over time, especially as the interview goes on. So just having that, again, glass of water, bottle of water, either before the interview, and then also having, right next to you during the interview, because the last thing you want to do is start coughing or choking and then not have anything.
No kidding.
Have anything around you. But yeah, that's really the biggest things that I find preparing is, one, just checking out the podcast, listening to a few of the episodes, and then two, having the podcast mic set up however you're going to be set up, have that set up beforehand, so that way you're not freaking out at the last minute trying to get everything set up. I know I have like a ton of cords all around me, so I always like to make sure I'm not stepping on anything. I'm not gonna like rip out my podcast mic like mid interview. And then two, or three, having that bottle of water around you. I think that really helps you, and obviously the more podcast interviews you do, like maybe in the beginning, like you're rehearsing your about story, you're rehearsing the questions that someone's going to ask you. I don't do that now, just because been doing this been doing in the podcasting space since 2015. So I'm pretty comfortable at it. But for someone that's newer, but you don't want it to be so scripted, you don't want to write down like your about bio again, but like if you want to rehearse it, or I know Jen, you'd sent over like the badass questions they're going to be asking. It helps give me some insight, like, oh, like that's a unique question. Let me actually take like a few minutes here to think about how I'm going to answer it. And then similar on these other podcasts that are out there, the hosts are usually making it easier on themselves. So they're going to be asking usually at the end of the podcast the same sort of questions that they're going to be asking every guest. So maybe you check out 2 or 3 and you're like, oh, these are the questions that I can expect. That's how I can prepare myself for it. So just becoming fully prepared between all that. So you're not just coming to the interview with just plugging your mic in at the last second, not drinking a glass of water. Honestly, I have no idea even the host's name that you're talking to. Or I always like to find myself to determine how long is the podcast interview going to go. So I'll take a look before I even go on the podcast. Like Jen, I took a look yesterday. I saw, hey, those interviews that she does anywhere from 40 or 60 minutes, give or take here or there. So I know, okay, it's going to be a longer conversation. I know that I can explain a little bit deeper. Where if I see I'm going on a podcast and the interviews are only 15, 20 minutes, I know I have to be a little bit more concise with my answers. I can't tell as much story as I would like to, because I'll only get through like 1 or 2 things before the interview is over. So again, that's another sort of tidbit that I wanted to make a mention to your audience.
I think all that is outstanding. And how I got into podcasting is so this is my 4th season, and it was never on the forecast in my life. I just never even considered it. And one of my friends, Devin Bravaco, shout out to my girl Devin, she pushed me out of my comfort zone and said, I want you to join this. We're doing this. It's called PodMax. And I was featured on 3 national podcasts, and they teach you how to be a good guest. And I loved all of it. And so then I did the next one. And one of my idols, Hal Elrod, was the keynote speaker. Hal Elrod, I love you. If you're listening, be on my podcast. But anyway, so Hal Elrod was on there, and it was just such an inspiration. He wrote the book Miracle Mornings, by the way. And I was like, I want to do my own podcast. And it has been so beneficial for me because it has definitely built my credibility. As soon as we finish this, I'm actually driving across town and I'm speaking at an event today on how I do the 5-day flip. And then I got to come back and record another podcast after that. But it has really just boosted things for me and helped me personally. But I get to meet awesome people like you, and what you do for other real estate investors. It's just, I can have these one-on-one conversations. So what advice do you have for people? Should they start their own podcast or should they make guest appearances?
And that's always the question when someone's coming to me. Should I start my own podcast? Should I guest on podcast? And I don't think that there's a clear-cut answer, but I'm going to try to do my best for your audience and let them know and how I respond to our clients. And if someone's just going out there and they're just getting started in real estate, say they're relatively new and I don't want to say that they haven't done much, but let's say it's someone on the smaller end where, say they've done they have 10 units or they've only done 5 deals, or even a small client, say they only have $1 million in asset under management. That's typically going to be a smaller real estate investor, where it's going to be a lot harder for you to go out there and be a guest on podcasts, just because there's so many really successful investors going out there and doing it, where someone that's a little bit newer, it's going to be a little bit trickier for you to get on these shows. And not to say that there aren't shows out there. There's the bigger pockets, like Real Estate Rookie Show, where they're interviewing people that have only done a deal or two. So there are shows that are out there, but again, it's going to be a little bit more of a challenge. So what I recommend is sort of to piggyback off other people's audiences, is to start your own podcast at that point, and then you can bring on some of these successful guests. And let's say you brought on Hal onto your show and had him come on, and then you get to say, hey, I had this interview with Hal, and then people say, oh, you must be pretty successful if you're getting him on your podcast. And obviously there's other investors or other successful folks that are out there, and then you start your own show. And that's what I did back in 2015. I wasn't running Podcasting You, but I was running a separate company at that time. And I was just getting my foot in the door into entrepreneurship and building a business. And I just started interviewing these super successful entrepreneurs and real estate investors. I think I had interviewed Jay Papasan, the co-author, the Millionaire Real Estate Investor, just these different folks that were out there that were just super successful. And I realized that helped me build my credibility, helped me build my brand. And then eventually I was able to go out there and sell a product. Probably not too well, because at the end of the day, I didn't run that company 2 years later and launch Podcasting You. But with that said, when I was just starting out, it was perfect for me was to go out there and start my own podcast. And then as I grew that company and became more successful, then it made sense for me to go out there and go on other people's podcasts. So I think if someone's just starting off, it makes more sense for you to start your own podcast than it necessarily does for you to go out there and go on other people's podcasts. And then when I mentioned the gray area, is folks that are successful, but at the same time, they can also start their own podcast, because then they can really supercharge their brand. And it makes sense for them to go on other people's podcasts to help them grow their brand. And that way, so as you become more successful, it's almost worth having both, where you're building your own audience on your own podcast, and then you're leveraging the host audience by going on other people's podcasts, and you're really supercharging it. But then it comes down to that time aspect, where when I'm a guest on a podcast, say, Jen, I'm showing up, maybe we talk for an hour, and then that's the end of it. That's the end of it for me. But for you, you have to prep the interview, then
Right.
Your team, or whether you or your team takes the interview to get it ready for release. There's a lot more work on the host side of it. So, and again, there's tons of services out there where you could outsource the work to and have someone help you out. But when you're beginning, it's going to be a little bit trickier to do that. When I was first starting my own podcast, I mean, I was doing everything, booking the guests, editing the podcast, writing the show notes, doing the social media for it, you name it. Yeah,
That's what I do.
yeah, exactly. I was doing it. And, as you grow over time, and as you potentially make more money, you can outsource it. But yeah, I think it's just a mixture of both. But again, when someone's first starting off, I recommend starting your own podcast. And then as you get more successful, keep them with your own podcast, but then also guesting on other people's podcasts. Because I mean, at the end of the day, you can take so much content from both of those and promote there on your social media, whether that's on YouTube, LinkedIn. I know LinkedIn's like a hotbed for real estate investors. It seems to be the best platform, or even throwing it up there on like TikTok. And there's all these different platforms where all video content I find is a lot easier to share than, at least personally for me, than me trying to sit down and write social media posts. Just having the video content is just so much easier to share than just sitting down and writing.
You said so much there, and I agree with so very much all of that. So thank you for saying that. And for the people who do want to start podcasts, it's a labor of love for me. I really don't make a fortune off this. It is more so I'm just, hey, I get to talk to cool people on Thursdays and Fridays when I book podcasts. And, it's been so beneficial for me. And it's also propelled me to be on some national podcasts, etc. So I agree with all of that. Now, if we have listeners out there saying, I'm an introvert, but I really like this Trevor guy and I feel like he can help me through this, how do they get in touch with you to learn more about Podcasting You, YOU?
Sure. They can go to our website, podcastingyou.com, as you mentioned, podcastingyou.com, or they can just connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram as well, just under my name, Trevor Oldham. And they can always shoot me a message or DM there. Happy to connect as well.
Wonderful. And you heard me give a badassery bestowment earlier, which was a little nugget about staging, which, by the way, I'm not a fan of virtual staging. I have to say, though, I have seen some really good ones recently where I'm like, whoa, but it is very true. I just kind of stay away from it. I feel like you need that emotional connection. Anyway, you heard me give this badassery bestowment. Do you have a badassery bestowment you can share with my listeners?
Yeah, I would say the best piece of advice that I could give your listeners out there is just to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that was for me in any endeavor that I did. I look back at my journey and really, I mean, the start of entrepreneurship was buying and selling phone cases, buying those from Alibaba. And then it was moving into bracelets and watches and building out a brand. Then it was building out a social media based company. I mean, we grew the following to 100K Instagram followers within 6 months, and that was the company that I had the podcast at. And just for those listening, just because you have a large Instagram following or build it doesn't necessarily mean you can make a ton of revenue. And then that led me to Podcasting You. And I think even now, I mean, I was taking sales calls from my dorm room back when I was in college. And then now, I mean, we're working with some of these companies we work with. I mean, they're not like, your Bain Capital where they got 180 billion and assets. But I mean, some of our companies we work with have, a couple of billion in assets, and it's me and myself and a small team. And I always got to continue to be uncomfortable and know and have that confidence within myself that, yeah, I'm only 26. And then these companies that I'm talking to are way more successful than my company, but there's a reason why they hire my company. It's to give them, their alternative marketing edge, where we get these smaller companies and they're not going to be able to outspend, say, like Bain Capital when it comes to Google ads or Facebook ads. I mean, they have an unlimited pocketbook, but the level of the playing field is when it comes to that alternative marketing, and which is sort of like what podcasting is, where, I mean, yeah, you could probably pay to go on some of these podcasts, but it's more of a level playing field at the end of the day. And that, again, not to get too much of a tangent, but that's what I really sort of got to remind myself when building this company. And again, just for your audience, just become uncomfortable. Even when I started my own podcast, I remember the first couple of guests just butchering their name, just being, wanting to cancel the interviews. It was terrible. But then you just become comfortable over time and you really start to enjoy it. So yeah, that's sort of, a good one piece of, I wouldn't say one piece of advice, but a good piece of advice I want to give your audience.
Well, I agree. And that uncomfortableness comes with a lot of ums and just Oh, I wish I could change the answer. And you can edit these. I can remember in the beginning, I said a few million times, and I was able to go, and it was annoying. It took so long to edit them. So I just got better at it. So being comfortable, being uncomfortable, I think that is excellent advice. So that's going to get us into the second part of this podcast, which is what makes Trevor Oldham a badass. And I use the acronym for badass, and the first letter is B for book. What's a book that's made a huge difference in your life?
I would say The Wealthy Gardener. I find that book is excellent. I know a lot of people say Rich Dad, Poor Dad and Think and Grow Rich. I mean, those are your typical books, but I find The Wealthy Gardener is excellent. And for those in the audience, just to give you a quick recap of it, it's basically a fable that a gardener is writing to his son, but it's actually the author writing to his son through these fables. And at the end of the day, it's a chiropractor. And over the course of like 20 years, he builds up a 200K passive income stream through owning his own, single family homes or rental property. So I found it to be, I mean, you see some of these real estate companies out there and they just grow so quickly. They say I grew from 0 to 100 million assets under management within 2 to 3 years, within a year. And I'm like, wow, that seems impossible to me. And then you start to read this book and it's like, wow, like this guy actually did it. He built it slow. He built it over time. He built it methodically. And I found it to be a more realistic story than some of what I see out there online today. So I always read that book. I try to read it at least once a year.
I have never even heard of that book. I'm going to have to check that out. And it's a real estate book.
Yep, it is.
Oh my goodness. All right. I like it. The Wealthy Gardener. I just wrote that down. All right. The first A in badass is for advice. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I would say the best piece of advice that I've ever received, just to think bigger. I found that working with my business coaches, and even now working with my coaches, I would say I want to do X amount of revenue this month, or I want to have X amount of clients, or I want to go on X amount of podcasts. And they're like, why not go on more? Why not do more? Why not build a company more? I'm like, I don't know. I never really thought about that. So I think it's really opened my mind where sometimes I could be in like a silo where I think, okay, it would be really cool if I could build a company up to X revenue. And they're like, no, like you can do way more than that. I'm like, oh, well, I guess I can. And so I think it's just, not limiting, not having that, not the self-confidence, but just limiting myself and actually pushing to go higher and then working back from there. So I think, and even for your audience that's listening to say, I can never start my own podcast, or I can never be a guest on a podcast, or I can never buy my first property. I can never flip my first property. At the end of the day, you just got to think bigger and say, okay, you just got to get the first one under your belt. Now you flipped your first property. How are you going to flip your next 10? How are you going to find, are you just building out a team, whatever it may be, and then sort of working back from there. So like, let's say like a big goal for mine is I want to sell the company for $4 million at some point in time, and, trying to get myself a 5-year horizon on that. It's like, okay, that's a big goal from where I am right now, but how do I work back from there? Like what exactly do I need to do? What systems, what processes do I need to put in place? And then you start to think like, okay, well, yeah, well, that was a big goal, but maybe could I do 10 million? Could I sell it for 20 million? Now you start to build out the systems and processes. So again, just to think bigger and not really shortcut yourself just because you haven't done anything or haven't done that much before.
I am going to tack onto this because I think this is really, really important to think bigger. But I want audience members, think bigger for you. Don't look at what everybody around you is doing and say, oh, I got to do what they're doing. Think bigger for you, because I personally don't want to scale. I don't want to have 100 employees. That to me sounds like a job, and I'm way too old to go back to feeling like having all that responsibility of managing people. So just I'm tacking onto that. I love that. And, with your goals, if you want to flip, 4 houses, why not think bigger? Maybe you want to flip 8 houses this year. So excellent, Trevor. Thank you for saying that. All right. The D in badass is for drive. What drives you to be successful?
I think I've always just wanted to accomplish more. I think no matter what it is, I've always just have to have something attainable to go after and trying to do new things, whether that was, back in college, going to get my real estate license just because I thought I wanted to do it. Hadn't heard of too many 18-year-olds going out and doing it and just wanted to do it. And then outside of that, I wrote a young adult fiction novel. I think it was like 75,000 words back when I was in college. And I was like, that would be something cool. I just want to go out and do it. And it took like 2 or 3 years to actually go through it. Just wanted to do it. And then now with the podcasting it's like, I want to grow this company to 4 million, or sell the company for 4 million, whether that's, say 2 or 3 million a year in revenue. That's what I want to sell the company for. And that just, I know I'm always just driven by having these goals, and whether that's, if it's outside of being in, the podcasting space, whether that's going to the gym and I want to run a mile in a certain amount, or I want to lift a certain amount of weight. And I think I've always just had pushing myself. And I think that just comes from, whether my family, always wanting to, my brother and sister always pushing themselves, always to find new opportunities. And especially my brother, he's similar to me, where doesn't have his own business, but he's in the sales space. So he's always trying to, he works heavily on commission, and he makes a nice income for himself, but he's always trying to push himself and make more income. He's always trying to push himself in the gym. So I think just being surrounded by everyone, I don't want to just be stuck. I don't want to say enough is enough. I don't want to work, say, a 9 to 5 and just be like, at the end of the day, that's all it is. I just want to have that full control over my life. And I think it's just been a long time coming. And I know I mentioned I started my own company and podcast back in 2015, been going to the gym for 12 years now. So, when starting off, and then it was just like, you want to push yourself further within the gym, within being there. I know. So, I mean, long story short, I think I've always just had this drive in me. I don't know if it's second nature. I know, now with the birth of my daughter, where I want to see her in the morning. So now it's getting up at like 4:30, getting to the gym for 5, getting back home early in the morning. So that way I can spend an hour and a half with her before she goes to daycare, and just having those priorities. And then I think too, the money aspect of it. I mean, I love the podcasting business, but I don't want to be doing this forever. I don't want to be managing clients. I don't want to be managing
exactly
a team forever. I obviously I enjoy it, and I don't want to dissuade anyone from listening, to think I hate the podcasting space. But I'm like, I've been doing this for 7 years, and coming up onto our 7th year now. And it's hard managing clients. It's hard managing a team. Everyone has their different personalities. Some clients super easy to manage. Some want to micromanage our company. Some employees are great. Some, are not so great. So it's always the ups and downs. I'm like, I don't want to be doing this for 30 years. I want to make as much as I can. And then for me, it's just investing that money into real estate and having that cash flow coming in the door to supplement, and not that I would ever stop working. I don't know what that would look like, but to give myself more choices, to, give myself more options than having to show up every day and get the job done.
Well, as 26 years old, you are well on your way to success. And I'm very impressed with you for all that you've done in your few years, young man. I'm going to say it again. All right. Moving on here. The second A in badass is for aspiration. I'm a big goal setter. So what is a goal you are currently working on?
Oh, it just cut out there for a second.
With my sound or can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can't hear me? Can you see me?
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, just cut out there for a second.
Oh, weird. All right, I will start that one over again. All right, moving on. The second A in badass is for aspiration. I'm a big goal setter. So what is a goal you are currently working on?
I would say the goal right now that I'm working on is primarily just this year, it's to invest about $60K into real estate. So for me, that's just more of the cash flow, the passive income stream. So right now, I got started, like I mentioned, about a year and a half ago, and the monthly distributions on that is about $600 a month. So I want to continue to build that up. So I'm just looking for your average 8% cash flow right now on the deals, not looking to necessarily knock it out of the park. I know right now our monthly expenses are pretty cheap. Well, I would say pretty cheap. Now that we have a daycare in there, that adds a little wrinkle in there, but our cars are paid off, no credit card debt, nothing like that other than our mortgage that we have. So I want to be able to grow the passive income streams to have more than just our standard expenses, which is, be your utilities, your groceries, and then your mortgage. So for us, that's about $3,500, $4,000 a month. So that's like my big goal. And I think when I was looking at the long-term horizon, when I was running the numbers, it'd be about 6 to 7 years. Obviously, if some of these real estate deals appreciate quicker, and that's not necessarily outside that self-storage development deal, but yeah, that's my big goal. Really for this year is to grow that 600 to get up to about 1,000 this year in the monthly passive income. Because I look at about every 25,000 I invest, I get about $200 extra a month. So then that seems sort of attainable to me. And then you start to run the numbers and different things like that. But yeah, that's my goal this year, is just to put 50K was the goal, but I'm like, why don't I just push a little further, try to get 60K, and then if I fall short, then I'm at my goal. But yeah, that's my big goal this year, and that's a big one. And a big one for me was paying off our car that we bought. We had two small cars, and then with the birth of our daughter, we wanted to get a nice SUV. So that was a goal last year, and I was happy I got that paid off the beginning of this month. So that was a nice one. So that helped out because our daycare went up 30%, which is a little bit, it's already enough. But yeah, that's the big goal, just to get the passive cash flow to come up and cover those expenses.
Well, very good and super, super smart. And that's a good, steady income for really just lending your money out and it's just coming right in and not having to lift your finger to do that. So that's the wonderful side of passive income coming in there. All right, moving on. The first S in Badass is for systems. What systems do you have in place to help you achieve success?
I found that what works best for me is following like the entrepreneur operating system. And I don't necessarily follow it to a T, I would say, but I try to follow it the best that I can. And for those listening, there's a book. I read the book called Traction by Gino Wickman, and this is where you can find the EOS system. So with that said, basically everything ties back into our goals that we have as a company. And with that said, so I have a scorecard set up for the company. And what that scorecard is we track in every single week how everything's going. So whether that's how many sales calls are we generating, how much new business are we bringing in, how many clients do we get booked on podcasts. So it might be something where if a new client works with us, our goal is to get 100% of clients set up within 48 hours after they fill out the client intake form for our company. After that, we want to get them booked on their first interview within 72 hours. Wow. After that, so like, what's our goal rate on that? Because we want to move quickly, because we know if someone's paying us money, the longer we take to get them booked on a podcast, the more they're going to be like, does this service actually work? Were they just lying to me on the sales call? That type of thing. So we want to get them booked quickly. So that's like, again, sort of some of our scorecards. So we have that set up every week. And then the KPIs go into the monthly KPI, where the scorecard's a weekly check-in, where the KPI is a monthly check-in. And I find that having that set up between the two of them really helps us track how we're doing, how the systems are going smoothly. And then with that said, I have I call it my knowledge base, but basically it's a manual on exactly how to run the company. So in case something happened to me, someone could step in. It might be smart. I don't know, 30 or 40 pages long. And I actually had a business coach recommend me to do that about 6 months ago. So anytime I implement something new, I just go through and I'll write down exactly how to do it. And I use a software called Loom, where you can walk someone through it, or you can use a tool called Tango if you don't need to talk to them. And it'll basically screenshot everything that you do while you're doing it, and which is pretty cool. And then it comes like a PDF. So I recommend those two tools. But yeah, at the end of the day, I find having the scorecard and the KPIs. And then for me, I had to hire an assistant just to help out to keep track of everything. That was
jealous.
I was trying to do it. I was trying to do that on my own. And I get so busy and tied up trying to improve the company and grow the company. And I found that having the assistant to check in, to put down on the KPIs and the scorecard just having her is a breath of fresh air. And, bringing her on for 5 to 10 hours a week just to come on and help track it. But yeah, that's really how I sort of track everything. And then, yeah, again, going back to that knowledge base, it has everything. So as soon as someone comes in there's the exact concrete steps that they have to know exactly what's going on in the company, what they should be doing, how to get themselves prepared. And then that way it can really, if I'm selling the company, I can't really be in the company per se. Not that I can't be, but I really need the business to be hands off, where anyone could come in and run it. And that's sort of how I think about every action I take. How could someone come in and run this company where, I know, let's say if I was laying on a beach for a week or two or a month or 6 months, could my business still function without me in it? And that's sort of the lens that I have. And I think for your audience out there listening too, if let's say you're running a house flipping business, how could you set it up where you're not necessarily the one doing all the work? What people do you need to put in place? And it's not easy. It takes a while. It's not like it happens overnight. It's a long process. And even I'm still working on it. But yeah, that's sort of how I look at it. I was like, if I just could not run this business, how can I ensure that this business is still running smoothly?
I love that. And I need to get better at doing that. And I instead of Loom, I use Screencast-O-Matic, and I've been using that one forever. And it's user friendly to me, but Thank you for that reminder, because I got to get on that just in case my husband and I get hit by a bus tomorrow. Who's going to take over our business and know where things are? So thank you for that. All right. To wrap up this interview, the final S in badass is for success. What does success mean to Trevor Oldham?
Success means for me is taking care of our clients. But on top of that, it's spending time with the family. I don't want to run a business where I drop my daughter off at daycare at 8. Pick her up about 4 between me and my wife. We both work at home, but I don't want to be growing this business and working, say, in the morning I work out and then I hang out with her for a little bit. But then I don't want to be working from she comes home at 4 to 7 o'clock at night where I'm not spending any time with my family. Success means for me is having a profitable business, enough where I can take the income, invest it into real estate, but also be able to spend time with my family. And I know you mentioned earlier in our show about growing the company. I would honestly rather have a company, and maybe I can't get to that 4 million mark in selling it, but if I could have a company that does 400, 500K a year in revenue with 5 employees and I can net out 200K, that's fine for me, rather than doing 2 million a year in revenue with 50 employees. Right. And then I'm also taking home 200K. But now I have all this additional overhead, and now you're talking triple, 4 times, 5 times the clients. I'm like, that's going to be a nightmare within itself. Do I necessarily want to do that? So I think that's really what it means for me. And I think we see these flashy numbers out there of people talking, hey, I'm flipping all these houses, but would you rather flip 1 house and make 100K or flip 10 houses and make 10K? But you said, hey, I flipped 10 houses. It's like, you did, but you did 10 times the amount of work, or maybe, I don't know if that's the correct wording, but this person did 1 and made just as much of you without having to go out and maybe wholesale find new deals, or, send the direct mail leads, or however they do it. But yeah, that's sort of what success looks like for me, is making sure I have time with the family, but also making sure that the business is coming overwhelmed. And then I find the best part is within the business is staying lean. I mean, sometimes we do get a client that's just a pain to deal with, and just paying them back their money, just being, hey, I don't want to deal with you. Here's your money back. And, call it at the end of the day. So I would include that in the successes. I only want to work with people I want to work with at the end of the day. I don't want to be in the middle of the night, waking up thinking, oh God, how am I going to handle this client today?
That is gold, what you just said there. I love that. You know what? I don't want to deal with this house. Here, just take your money back. So I think that's fantastic. Well, Trevor, it has been a pleasure having you on the show. One more time, how did the listeners find you?
Of course, they can go to our website, podcastingyou.com. That's podcastingyou.com. Or they can check me out on LinkedIn or Instagram as well. Just my name, Trevor Oldham. Happy to connect there as well.
Trevor, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And that is all. Thank you for listening. And we will catch you on the next episode. Now go out there and share your badassery. And don't forget, make it a great day. Take care. Bye-bye. Whoop, whoop.
Thank you for listening to RAIN, the Real Estate Investor Growth Network. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. If you need more badassery, you can follow Jen Josie by visiting therealjenjosie.com or become a member of RAIN by registering on rainmastermind.com.